In this module, I want to talk about fixing the lighting. Now that you've gotten your images into Lightroom, you've culled out those that you don't want to deal with and have to edit. Now we're going to do is to fix lighting. And I strongly suggest that you do this first. Now, on the right-hand side of Lightroom is a series of edit tabs. My recommendation is go down the editing process from top to bottom of those tabs in that sequence. So we're going to look at exposure, contrast, shadows, highlights, and midtones. So one, we're going to look at the image. Where are its strengths? Where are its weaknesses? What do we want to change? So then we figure out what tools and techniques we want to use to fix it. We go through that plan. Sometimes during the plan, we have to kind of re-strategize, but we go through a plan and we get to a point where we feel it's fixed. Put the image away for a day or two and then reanalyze the image in Lightroom. You may find that you don't like it after a day or two where you thought you had it just right. So you may need to fix that, correct it, or even worse, have to start all the way over from the raw file.
But I'm really, really easily annoyed, for those of you who have gotten to know me a little bit. And when I notice something in a picture, it drives me totally crazy. And I cannot let go of it until I fixed it. In theory, that's a good thing, because then I really make sure my pictures look great. Except then I never feel like I actually finished a picture. There's always something else that catches my eye.
So let's look at some definitions. Exposure. Exposure is the overall brightness or darkness of the image. So when you adjust exposure, the light parts get lighter, the dark parts get lighter, the midtones get lighter. Contrast is the range from the brightest part of the image to the darkest part. Often we work to stretch that out to maximize it for visual impact. Highlights. This is where we adjust just the lighter parts of the image, but it does not touch white. Shadows is how we adjust the dark parts of the image, not black. And midtones obviously is adjusting the content that falls into the middle gray. Let's let Lightwork do its magic for you. So you're going to go open the image in the library tab. If it's not in the grid view, which is all the thumbnails across the page, get it into the grid view, select all, and now you're going to go to the right-hand panel and look, and you will see quick develop. Pull that down, and there's an auto button, and you click the auto button, and that will then instruct Lightroom to do its best job of fixing the exposure. It's my experience that autofix works great at times, and some of the images become worse than the original, but it's worth a try to save you the effort of having to do it on the files themselves. When complete, we're going to click on the Develop tab. And if you're not happy with results from one or more images, select the images you want changed back to default, highlight them. Remember to select multiple ones. You hold down the Control key, and then go to the bottom right of the panel and hit Reset. And that's going to return them all to the way they looked when you imported them. What is right? Editing is a subjective situation, and many adjustments are made obviously to fit your personal taste. There often is no right answer other than what your eyes tell you looks the best it can be. And having taught this in a face-to-face class, people will take the same image and their editing style will create different results. The only person whose opinion counts is yours. One of the common flaws is that most people over adjust images. Just look at social media at sunset pictures, and we will see those that you go, whoa, because they are over edited and it is obvious. Workflow. Once again, within this sub box, I recommend you go from top to bottom. So if the image exposure or contrast is off, that's where I suggest you start making adjustments. Here's kind of a overview of what you need to edit is an understanding of these correction. Is the overall image too bright or too dark? You're going towards the exposure. Is there too much or too little contrast? You're going to adjust the contrast. Are the bright areas only of your image too bright? You're going to adjust that with highlights. Are the dark areas of your image too dark? Shadows. Are the midpoints too dark or too light? Then you're going to adjust levels. Let's sort of test our knowledge. We're looking at these photos and what is wrong with them. So I'll pause for a second. And based on what you learned in the previous slide, where would you begin fixing these? Two more. Where would you begin fixing them and what tool? Now, the one on the right is a little bit of a trick because it is difficult to notice that the back of the egret is too bright. So you're going to want to see if you can use highlights to take the brightness on the back of that egret down.
Now, a histogram is one of the simplest, easy to use, and helpful exposure tools available. Now, I have a camera pointing over there, and this monitor is recording the output of the camera so I can show you what's going on. So you can call up the histogram in live view mode by pressing the info button on your camera multiple times until it appears. There it is. That on the top right is the histogram. So a histogram is basically a graph of luminance value against pixel count. The left edge of your histogram represents a luminance value of 0, which is pure black, and the right edge would be pure white. And then there's everything in between. The left part of your histogram represents the shadows, which are the darker bits of your image. The middle part of the histogram would be the midtones, and the part towards the right would be your highlights, the brighter bits of your image. So the histogram will change with your image. So if I stick my hand in the frame, you can see the histogram change about. I'm introducing a lot more midtones in the histogram. So right now you can see there's a small spike in the histogram, which means there's a lot of pixels, or a lot of my image is falling in this luminance range. You can see there's a small spike in the shadows. It's not exactly black yet, it's almost there, but this little spike probably corresponds to this little pen in the foreground, which is the darker parts of the image. So if I cover the pen, that dark spike should go away. So yep, there it is. So now if I intentionally overexpose my image, let me bump up the ISO a bit more. You can see the histogram getting squashed towards the right edge because there's a lot more pixels, more parts of my image are bright now. And if you look at the rightmost edge, there's a huge spike. That means a lot of pixels are crushed to pure white. You generally want to avoid that because detail is lost once it's crushed to the right edge. Because that means that details are lost because they are clipped to pure white. So now, if I intentionally underexpose my image, you can see the histogram being moved, squashed towards the left edge. Right now, there's a lot of shadows in my image, as you can see, a lot of spikes in the shadow region, a lot of pixels are very dark, and similar to the right edge, you can see there's a huge spike towards the left edge of the image. That means those are crushed to pure black. Again, details are lost as well. So the general rule of thumb for exposing correctly using a histogram would be to balance out the histogram towards the middle. So if I were to try to expose my image properly this time round, so now that the image is properly exposed, you can see the histogram is balanced towards the middle. We have a healthy dose of midtones, some shadows, again that pen holder in the foreground. Now, of course, there are exceptions for exposing your image by balancing out the histogram towards the middle. Say if you're intentionally going for a very high-key blown out look, then it's no surprise that your histogram is going to be clustered towards the right. Or if you're going for a very low-key dark look, then you're going to have a lot more pixels in the shadow areas. So that's pretty much it on how you read a histogram. It simply tells you how much of your image is how bright. So it's a very useful exposure tool.
I hope you found that previous video useful as a foundation because we are going to go and use the histogram to get some of our editing done. Here is the basic adjustment panel on the right-hand side. So as you see, we have auto. So that's the same auto as we used before. We have exposure. We have a slider. To the right, lightens it. To the left, darkens it. Contrast. To the right, ups the contrast. To the left, reduces contrast. Highlights. To the right, lightens the highlights. To the left, it's going to darken the highlights. Shadows, whites. Now, whites is the very brightest part of the image, and blacks are the very darkest part of the image. If you want to zero out any of these functions, you just click on the name. So if I want to zero out the highlights, I double click on the highlight name in the tab. Use the histogram as a guide for you to make this adjustment to make sure that you're not putting informational parts of the image either too black or too white. So use your histogram. If you just correct the devil out of it, it's my experience that the images end up looking muddy and flat. Okay, here's the shadows and highlights. Once again, in the basic tab, pull down. And so darken highlights, go to the left. This darkens the light areas of your photo and reveals more of the highlight details that was captured. If a part is so overexposed, it is pure white, nothing you can do. Lighten shadows. This is a very common adjustment for me. Now remember, auto has already done this for you. So you will not see the sliders in the center. They are the position that the auto exposure adjust or tone control has set for you. So lighten the shadows. I find that typically I want to bring out some more in the shadows. So it is very useful. You can lighten and darken shadows and images. It is graceful often when you haven't quite nailed the exposure exactly right. And I often find it useful for high contrast situations, sunny outdoor images with sun and heavy shade, weddings, beach photos, and those kind of environments tend to create overly contrasty images. And you have to watch your histogram that you don't blow out something that you need. So I'm going to have you do virtual practice. And we look at that image, and what is the first thing that jumps out at you? Snow needs to be almost white. So if you were me, I'd first try the auto exposure. Does okay. And then I'm going to reset that and try adjusting it with exposure and contrast, paying attention to the histogram so the blacks are not crushed up to the left side and the whites aren't crushed up to the right side, but almost there.
Now, normally, I don't even touch the exposure slider. Don't even touch the exposure slider. Mostly because right out of the camera, all my exposures are perfect. I had to go digging and digging to try to find this picture just to have an example of one that wasn't just spot on right out of the camera. No, that's not true, but I would love it if you would believe it. I don't touch the contrast slider because I pretty much never need it. Not because the picture was good out of the camera necessarily, but because I'm going to use different techniques. But in this case, the exposure was a little bit off, I would say. And by off, I don't mean that I clipped anything. You can see from the histogram, nothing is clipped in terms of highlights or shadows, but rather it's a little bit overall dark. I think overall the exposure should be a little bit brighter. Not by very much, but because I'm talking about just a general brightening of the frame, I'm going to take that exposure slider and drag it upward just a little bit. Instead, I'll focus my attention on the whites, blacks, highlights, and shadows sliders. So I'm going to hold the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on Macintosh so that I can get the clipping preview, which is a fancy way of saying I want to be able to somewhat carefully set the white point so that the brightest pixel in the image is about white. And then I'll increase the value for whites. You notice that histogram jumping way over, but notice also that the histogram is stretching a bit. We're affecting the highlights, the bright areas of the image, more than we're affecting the darker shadows. Once I start to see pixels appear, that indicates that I am losing detail in one or more channels within the photo. How much detail do I want to sacrifice in the highlights? Pretty much none. Maybe a tiny little bit sometimes, but generally not very much and possibly none. So a sort of typical approach for me would be to, again, holding the Alt or Option key on the keyboard, drag that white slider over to the right till I start to see pixels appearing, and then go back to the left just to the point that the last of those pixels disappear, or maybe where there's just a few of those pixels in the image. Then comes the most important part, the reality check. I let go of the Alt or Option key, and I'll want to evaluate the result. What have we done to the image? Is that good or bad? Well, it's sort of hard to make a determination just yet because we still have some other sliders that we want to take a look at. And part of this process is stretching out our tonal information so that we have whites and blacks, full contrast range, etc., which usually is a good goal for an image, but it's not always the right approach for an image. So we'll want to check the image once we're finished with this basic process. So I'm going to go now to the blacks slider, once again holding the Alt key on Windows, Option key on Macintosh, and then I'll drag that slider over toward the left until I start to see pixels appearing. In other words, until I'm starting to lose detail in the photo, in this case, at the darkest values in the image. And then I'll bring that slider back over toward the right until those pixels, generally speaking, disappear. I might be willing to sacrifice shadow detail. Maybe. But I'm almost never willing to sacrifice highlight detail. Then I get to move on to probably my favorite tonal adjustments of all in Lightroom's Develop module, and that is highlights and shadows. And here we can brighten or darken the highlights or the shadows in the image.
Here is a tool that is just, you will be amazed at how many times you use it. As you're doing an edit, you might make an adjustment and look at it and say, I don't like that. The previous version was better. So to undo that single edit, you hit Control Z. That undoes that one step. If you go, I don't know, was it better? Control Y will take you one step back in your edited process. Now to reset any slider to default, which is typically in the middle, double click on the name, check your results, and go back and adjust if more is needed. You're editing, and this will happen to you. I know because it happened to me. Is I'm editing, and it's just getting worse and worse, and I want to start over. So on the left panel, you're going to find a pull down menu called History, and that is all the edits you made in sequence from the bottom, which is where it came in. Then you see I did auto, shadows, exposure, white, highlights. And let's say I want to take it back to the import state. I would click on the import. If I want to take it back to where I had adjusted exposure, I'll click on that. And that will erase all edits from then on and take you back to there. So you just highlight that, double click, and that restores that file to whatever point you were in the editing sequence. Adjusting midtones. So you've done everything, but you want to just kind of move the midtone around. So you want to lighten or darken the midtones. So you're going to mouse over the histogram, and you will find it places a double-headed arrow over where your mouse is. Hold left mouse key, the arrow disappears, and slide left or right to get the desired result. I have the double arrow in the midpoint, and I slide it left, and you see what happens when I slide it right. You can go to the highlights, take that double arrow and move that, and that's going to mostly move highlights. You can go to the blacks, move them with the double arrow, and it mostly focuses on the small portion of the histogram. For those who want a little more advanced technique, there's something called the tone curve. Tone curve will come up with a histogram with a line from black to white going diagonally. If you click on a part of an image that you want to adjust, it'll put a circle there. If you mouse over the circle, you can move the circle up to brighten, down to darken, and that allows you to take very specific parts of your image to adjust. Now, some of that adjustment spills over to adjacent tonal portions of your image. Practice. Practice makes almost perfect. You're not going to get good at this game unless you practice and practice. Just as a review, redoing this slide, too bright, too dark, exposure, contrast, too much, too little, bright parts, highlights, dark parts, shadows, midtones, histogram. Adjust the whites and the blacks as needed. You can do that on the histogram also. And if you are more adventuresome, I would suggest the ultimate control comes from using the tone bar curve. Thank you for spending time with me. I hope this is helpful. We are still in the early stages of developing these modules from simple to more complex. And so I hope they've met your needs. Be sure to subscribe and check the notify because it is my intent to continue to produce these videos.